Across the Caribbean, murder rates are climbing faster than ever. In Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, and Haiti, gang violence, drug trafficking, and organized crime are fueling a deadly crisis. Today, Caribbean Files takes you inside the numbers, the streets, and the shocking realities behind the headlines. Stay with us. What you're about to see will change the way you think about crime in the Caribbean. Paradise is an easy headline, but the Caribbean's recent crime data tell a different story, one written in police blotters, morgue ledgers, and emergency decrees. In 2024, several Caribbean states recorded sharp rises in homicides or deadly violence. The drivers varied, street robberies turning lethal, firearms flooding small markets, gang feuds reigniting. But the outcome converged: more bodies, more trauma, more pressure on already thin institutions. Suriname's spike was a shock. By September 2024, authorities counted 190 homicides, an explosion that pushed the homicide rate to 29.9 per 100,000 and represented a 382.3% jump over the prior year's rate, according to a cross regional review by Insight Crime. What stands out here is not a sudden cartel war, but the collapse of everyday safety. Violent robberies rose 143%, and gun crimes climbed 123%. In practical terms, disputes that once ended in injuries or arrests ended instead in funerals. The violence was widespread, the victims ordinary, and the escalation unmistakable. Barbados, long marketed with reason as one of the region's safer destinations, saw its own surge. The Barbados Crime Observatory reported 49 homicides in 2024, a 158% increase year over year, with firearms used in 34 of those killings. That count pushed the island to a modern record homicide rate and reframed public debate, from isolated flare ups to a systemic gun problem. The geography of the killings matters too. Analysts and police briefings pointed to hot spots clustered in St. Michael Parish, where economic precarity and gang rivalries intersect with the easy availability of imported guns. The observatory's framing was blunt. Gun crime fueled the record surge, even as other categories of crime fell. For raw lethality relative to population, the Turks and Caicos Islands topped every chart in Latin America and the Caribbean. By mid December 2024, the territory had recorded 48 murders, translating to a homicide rate of 103.1 per 100,000 and marking a 121.3% increase in rate over 2023. Small population effects can magnify per capita rates, but that doesn't dilute the operational reality on the ground.
Tonight, potential new concerns for travelers after an American tourist visiting the Turks and Caicos Islands was killed with two others in a shooting, according to police. The suspected gunman even sprang this police vehicle that intercepted them. Turks and Caicos police say the same armed gang member shot at a car holding tourists.
A multi island archipelago sitting astride drug, gun, and human smuggling corridors, policed by limited forensic resources and stretched personnel. The data forced a reckoning. This wasn't just an aberration, it was a structural vulnerability exploited by transnational networks and amplified by local gang dynamics. Trinidad and Tobago's numbers were grim and historic. By year's end 2024, the country counted 625 homicides, the highest annual toll on record. The government responded with emergency powers, citing intelligence on gang reprisals and the proliferation of high powered weapons. Those measures authorized warrantless searches and extended detentions, extraordinary steps that underscored exceptional risk. While provisional 2025 figures showed fewer murders by mid year compared to the same point in 2024, The year over year story from 2023 into 2024 is unambiguous. The country crossed a threshold into record level bloodshed, driven largely by gang conflict and gun trafficking. Haiti's crisis sits in a category of its own: national security collapse with mass civilian harm. The UN Human Rights Office reported at least 5,601 people killed in 2024, over 1,000 more than in 2023, as gangs consolidated territory and expanded their repertoire of violence, massacres, kidnappings, and systematic displacement. Subsequent UN and press briefings in 2025 described near total control by armed groups over most of Port au Prince and a state of emergency covering multiple departments in response to continued attacks. Haiti's inclusion here is not about marginal increases, it is about a measurable, documented escalation in lethal attacks year over year, with the humanitarian consequences to match. Across these countries, one constant keeps resurfacing: guns. Caribbean governments and international partners have repeatedly traced a high share of recovered firearms to U.S. sources, trafficked into small markets where a handful of weapons can swing the balance of power in a neighborhood. Reporting through late 2024 detailed how the steady inflow of illicit firearms corresponded with surges in killings on multiple islands. The linkage isn't a theory, it shows up in seizures, serial number traces, and case files, and it has become a central pillar of regional security conversations. The geography of risk differs, but the institutional stress looks familiar. In Suriname, the spike in everyday robberies going lethal hinted at strained first response capacity and deterrence. In Barbados, analysts warned that gun enabled violence outpaced traditional policing rhythms, forcing the state to adapt tactics without sacrificing civil liberties. Turks and Caicos face the math of small forces versus transnational supply chains, border policing stretched across sea lanes where one fast boat can undo a month of gains. Trinidad and Tobago's record toll forced the state into emergency posture, with all the debates that come with extraordinary powers. Haiti's trajectory, state institutions hollowed by years of crisis, has required international assistance, even as the security environment complicates deployment. These are not identical crises, and they will not yield to a single fix. But the pattern, a documented increase in lethal violence within 2024 across multiple jurisdictions, demands a sober accounting. The stories behind the figures are granular: a robbery at dusk that ends in a homicide charge, a neighborhood feud destabilized by a single new rifle, a gang boundary redrawn with blood, a police investigation that arrives minutes too late. When aggregated, they form a regional map of vulnerability. A caution is in order about per capita rates in microstates and territories. One cluster of events can send the rate soaring. This is the ledger for 2024: Suriname's homicides ballooning with street crime turning deadly, Barbados's modern record murder year, firearm driven, Turks and Caicos surpassing every nation in the broader region in homicide rate amid smuggling pressures, Trinidad and Tobago logging its deadliest year on record, Haiti recording thousands more killings than the year before as gangs entrench. Each country's crisis is distinct, but together they redraw the narrative of Caribbean security. Numbers tell scale, stories tell consequence. The 2024 surge in lethal violence across parts of the Caribbean did not unfold in spreadsheets alone. It played out in kitchens where children asked why a parent never came home, in hospital corridors where surgeons treated bleeding civilians, and at funerals where entire neighborhoods turned out to bury young lives never given time to age. Reporting from across the region shows a pattern: sudden, often senseless killings that ripple out to traumatize families, fracture communities, and strain already fragile public services. In Suriname, the analytics reported by Insight Crime, a 382% rise in homicides and steep increases in violent robberies and gun crime, translated on the ground into a pervasive sense of insecurity. Local press and regional analysts described streets where routine transactions became risky and where petty disputes escalated because firearms were more readily present. Police stations reported increased caseloads for routine robberies that now involved shots fired. Social services noted growing calls from families in neighborhoods where young men disappeared or were found dead. The data make clear that the country's spike was not remote cartel violence, but the conversion of low level criminality into lethal outcomes, an erosion of everyday safety that left ordinary citizens living with a new and acute fear. Barbados saw the statistical uptick become personal in concentrated urban communities. Official crime tallies show the island recorded a record number of firearm enabled killings in 2024, with hotspots in parishes such as St. Michael. Local coverage documented families coping with sudden losses and criminal investigations stretched by limited forensic capacity. Court reporting throughout 2025 also tracked ongoing prosecutions tied to those killings, murder trials, suspects held on remand, and at least one high profile case tied to the death of a schoolteacher that captured public attention because it highlighted how violence had penetrated everyday life. Those courtroom dramas are not abstractions. They are the legal echo of funerals, of parents waiting for answers, of communities that once felt insulated, now demanding immediate action. The Turks and Caicos Islands' spike in murders had an especially visible impact because of the territory's small population. Reporting shows the 2024 homicide count, 48 deaths by mid December, pushed the per capita rate to the top of regional tables. For residents, the effect was visceral. News outlets documented high profile killings and, in 2025, a mass shooting at a night spot that left multiple dead and dozens wounded. Officials and community leaders described a society where a single violent event could dramatically alter the security landscape of an entire island. The pain here is concentrated and public. Families who lost breadwinners, small communities that saw longtime neighbors killed, and a local justice system under pressure to process cases that now number far more than in years past. In Trinidad and Tobago, the statistics were matched by scenes of collective grief and alarm. Reporting through the end of 2024 documented more than 600 homicides for the year, prompting government declarations of emergency powers intended to disrupt organized crime networks and gang feuds. Journalists on the ground recorded funerals for victims of gang reprisals, families pleading for protection, and communities living with the constant possibility of being caught in crossfire. Law enforcement described the spike as driven largely by gang fragmentation and tit for tat killings. Prosecutors and magistrates reported a caseload surge, with complex investigations hampered by witness intimidation and the dispersed nature of gang activity. The state's emergency measures, in turn, created new controversies. Some residents welcomed stronger police powers as necessary to restore order, while human rights advocates warned about potential abuses and the long term costs of military style policing. Those debates have been lived in town halls, in editorial pages, and in the households of citizens counting days without a loved one. Haiti offers a different scale of suffering, a humanitarian crisis where the spike in lethal violence reflects systemic collapse. United Nations reporting and multiple press investigations documented thousands more killings in 2024 than in 2023, mass displacement of civilians, and neighborhoods held under the sway of gangs who carried out massacres, kidnappings, and other mass violence. For families, the consequences were immediate and catastrophic. Entire districts emptied as civilians fled, clinics closed because staff feared the streets, Survivors arrived at hospitals with wounds too severe for under resourced facilities to treat. The UN's figures and briefings underscore a characteristic of this crisis that separates it from others in the region. The scale is national, and the state's protective capacity is dramatically reduced, multiplying the human cost. Humanitarian agencies reported communities without reliable water, electricity, or access to food because violence disrupted supply lines. Every homicide sat against a backdrop of displacement and collapsing services. Across these jurisdictions, a handful of consistent human impacts recur. First, delays and bottlenecks in investigations lengthen families' anguish. Local media coverage across the region shows cases lingering on police desks while relatives wait for autopsy results, for arrests, or for court dates that move slowly through fragile judicial calendars. Second, economic precarity deepens because breadwinners are among those most at risk. Witnesses to shootings may lose jobs, and small businesses in affected neighborhoods report dropping revenue as locals curtail their movements. Third, psychological trauma spreads. Teachers report students returning to school anxious and distracted. Community centers field more requests for counseling. Clergy and civil society groups report higher demand for grief support. These are the ripple effects the statistics cannot fully capture, yet they are visible in reporting from each country. Finally, the regional diaspora has taken up the role of chronicler and campaigner. Caribbean communities abroad have organized vigils, amplified victims' names on social media, and pressured governments to act. Efforts documented in international coverage that connects local tragedies to transnational networks of concern. That attention matters. It brings resources, it focuses diplomatic pressure, and it ensures that the human cost of these surges does not vanish from public view. But it cannot, by itself, restore the dead or heal shaken families. The point is inescapable. When homicides rise, the human ledger grows heavier and the social fabric frays. In Suriname, Barbados, Turks and Caicos, Trinidad and Tobago, and Haiti, the 2024 to 2025 spike in lethal violence translated into families in mourning, communities in fear, and overstretched institutions scrambling for responses. The Caribbean remains one of the world's most significant drug transit corridors. The UN Office on Drugs and Crime, UNODC, has repeatedly highlighted the region's role as a bridge between South America's cocaine producers and consumer markets in North America and Europe. In Trinidad and Tobago, the police service confirmed in late 2024 that at least 40% of gang related murders were linked to control of transshipment points and smuggling networks. Rival groups have fought over access to docks, fishing vessels, and coastal landing sites. Customs officials reported a series of cocaine seizures at the port of Paramaribo, including a shipment of 500 kilograms in May 2024, indicating the scale of operations. Local media connected the rise in homicides. Suriname recorded a 20% year on year increase in murders in 2024 to criminal competition over trafficking profits. These flows destabilize entire neighborhoods. Business owners in Georgetown, Guyana, and Eastport of Spain have described extortion by groups with suspected ties to traffickers. For many residents, violence is not abstract, but woven into daily survival. The Caribbean Firearms Study, 2023, coordinated by CARICOM's Implementation Agency for Crime and Security, impacts, found that 70 to 80% of guns recovered in Jamaica, Trinidad, and Barbados originated from the United States. In Haiti, the UN panel of experts reported in 2024 that gangs had received shipments of AR 15 and AK 47 style rifles, belt fed machine guns, and ammunition trafficked primarily from Florida. These weapons, far deadlier than pistols or shotguns historically available, allowed gangs to launch mass attacks such as the August 2024 Carrefour Feuille massacre, where at least 30 civilians were killed. In Turks and Caicos, a government press release in April 2025 confirmed that 90% of murders in 2024 were committed with firearms, the highest proportion ever recorded in the territory. Officials attributed the spike to smuggled U.S. handguns. The equation is stark: more guns, deadlier guns, higher murder counts. In Barbados, authorities noted that of the 57 murders recorded in 2024, up from 43 the previous year, the majority involved firearms. Police Commissioner Richard Boyce publicly stated that the influx of guns had changed the face of crime on the island. Gang fragmentation is another critical driver. In Trinidad and Tobago, criminologist Darius Figuera noted in 2024 that large umbrella organizations like Rasta City and the Muslim Gang have splintered into dozens of neighborhood factions. Police statistics show that 60% of murders in 2024 were gang related, many of them revenge killings. In Jamaica, the Planning Institute of Jamaica, PIOJ, reported that while overall murders fell slightly in 2024, gang related killings still accounted for over 70% of cases. This structural reality, localized corner gangs fighting for small territories, mirrors what is now unfolding in Barbados and Suriname. The fragmentation ensures instability. When groups lack clear leadership, disputes escalate quickly and reconciliation becomes impossible. In Port of Spain, for instance, a single shooting in Laventille in late 2024 sparked a wave of reprisals that left 11 people dead in under 2 weeks. Caribbean law enforcement institutions often find themselves overwhelmed. In Trinidad and Tobago, the police service reported a backlog of over 500 unresolved homicide cases entering 2025. Conviction rates remain among the lowest in the region. Just 2 to 3% of murder cases lead to successful convictions. In Barbados, Attorney General Dale Marshall acknowledged in September 2024 that court delays were undermining deterrence, with some murder cases taking 5 to 7 years to reach trial. Haiti represents the most extreme collapse. The UN Integrated Office in Haiti reported that by the end of 2024, gangs controlled 80% of Port-au-Prince. Police officers abandoned posts, citing lack of pay and weapons. Civilians accused state actors of collusion with gangs, further eroding public trust. Suriname, though less extreme, faced similar challenges. Reports in Teed highlighted allegations of drug shipments moving through official customs channels, raising suspicions of collusion. The perception of corruption weakens institutions even when evidence is scarce. The roots of violence are also social. The Caribbean Development Bank noted in 2023 that youth unemployment across the region averages over 20%, with higher concentrations in urban poor communities. These are the very neighborhoods where gangs recruit. In Trinidad, reports indicate that over 3,000 primary and secondary school students dropped out in the last 5 years, a figure security analysts directly linked to gang vulnerability. Police Commissioner Erla Harewood Christopher described the recruitment of teenagers into gangs as a national emergency. Barbados, long considered relatively insulated, saw violence concentrated in public housing estates like the Pine and New Orleans. Community workers cited high unemployment and lack of recreational facilities as key drivers of youth delinquency. In Guyana, the U.S. State Department's 2024 crime report pointed to increasing armed robberies and homicides in Georgetown, tied both to local unemployment and spillovers from Venezuelan migrant flows. Caribbean violence rarely stays confined. The CARICOM Crime and Security Strategy, 2024, warned that trafficking networks shift rapidly between islands, exploiting the weakest link. After the Dominican Republic tightened airport security, seizures in Turks and Caicos and Barbados spiked. Haiti's collapse has had regional effects. Thousands of refugees fled by sea in 2024, some intercepted in the Bahamas, Turks and Caicos, and Jamaica. Officials in Trinidad and Tobago warned that armed groups could infiltrate migration flows, carrying weapons and tactics across borders. Suriname's rise in trafficking cases illustrates this balloon effect. As Colombia and Venezuela became riskier for smugglers, traffickers rerouted through Paramaribo and onward to Caribbean and European markets. Violence followed. The statistics add up to an atmosphere of dread. In Trinidad and Tobago, with 625 murders in 2024, one of the highest per capita rates in the world at 39 per 100,000. Fear shapes daily life. In Barbados, where the murder rate nearly doubled in 2 years, citizens accustomed to safety now speak of avoiding certain neighborhoods at night. Turks and Caicos, with a population of just 45,000, recorded 30 murders in 2024, giving it a per capita murder rate of 67 per 100,000, the highest in the Caribbean, surpassing Jamaica. Haiti, though, remains the most extreme. The UN reported over 8,400 killings and injuries in 2024, many the result of mass attacks. These numbers are not just data points. They represent lives lost and communities living under siege. The homicide surge of 2024 to 2025 cannot be dismissed as coincidence. It is the product of structural vulnerabilities, geography that makes the Caribbean a corridor for illicit flows, institutions too weak or compromised to respond effectively, and social inequalities that leave young men vulnerable to recruitment. Without interventions to cut off weapons supply, reform law enforcement, and provide real opportunities for youth, the region risks not just maintaining, but escalating these deadly trends. Every murder leaves behind families torn apart. In Trinidad and Tobago, funeral parlors reported being overwhelmed, particularly in urban centers like San Fernando and Port of Spain. Local media described double and triple funerals where mothers buried multiple sons killed in gang feuds. In Barbados, where the murder rate doubled in 2 years, residents of Bridgetown's Pine community told reporters in late 2024 that they were afraid to leave their homes at night. "We never used to lock our doors," one resident said. "Now we don't sleep." The United Nations Integrated Office in Haiti documented over 8,400 people killed or injured in 2024. Behind each figure are communities like Carrefour Fouille or Cité Soleil, where children walk to school past burned houses and bullet-scarred walls. Curfews, vigilante groups, and migration have become survival strategies. In Guyana, with an uptick in armed robberies and homicides, shopkeepers in Georgetown have shuttered their businesses early. In Turks and Caicos, churches now organize escort groups so parishioners can walk home safely after evening services. The homicide crisis has spilled into politics. In Trinidad and Tobago, former Prime Minister Keith Rowley faced mounting criticism after the 2024 murder count made headlines as one of the highest in the world per capita. Opposition parties called for the resignation of Police Commissioner Erla Harewood Christopher, citing low conviction rates and unsolved murders. In Barbados, Attorney General Dale Marshall conceded in a September 2024 press conference that the surge in gun crime had fundamentally altered public confidence in security. The Mia Mottley administration pledged tougher gun laws and fast-tracked judicial reforms. In Haiti, the collapse of security institutions led to the resignation of Prime Minister Ariel Henry in early 2024. By mid-year, gangs controlled most of Port-au-Prince, forcing the international community to approve the deployment of a Kenya led multinational security force. The move reflected both the desperation of the Haitian state and the recognition that the crisis posed regional risks. Governments have not stood idle. In Trinidad, the police service launched Operation Blue Line in late 2024, targeting known gang leaders and increasing stop and search operations in hotspots like Laventille and Morvan. Officials credited the initiative with removing over 600 illegal firearms from circulation in just 6 months. In Jamaica, the government continued its controversial use of states of public emergency in parishes with high violence. While officials say SOEs disrupt gangs, critics, including human rights groups, argue they allow indefinite detention without charge. Barbados took a different approach. In 2024, the government passed legislation allowing for harsher penalties for illegal gun possession, up to 20 years in prison. Police also received expanded surveillance powers, including the use of wiretaps with judicial oversight. Authorities intensified port inspections after multiple large cocaine seizures in 2024. While this disrupted trafficking, it also triggered reprisals between gangs, fueling homicide spikes in Paramaribo. The Caribbean has turned increasingly to regional bodies for solutions. CARICOM's Implementation Agency for Crime and Security ramped up its Regional Crime and Gun Intelligence Unit in 2024, improving information sharing among member states. For the first time, ballistic data was exchanged between Jamaica, Trinidad, and Barbados, allowing investigators to track weapons across borders. The Caribbean Basin Security Initiative, backed by the United States, also expanded funding in 2024, earmarking 74 million US dollars for law enforcement training and port security upgrades across the region. U.S. officials acknowledged that most illegal guns originate in Florida and Puerto Rico, though critics argue Washington has been slow to impose export controls. The multinational force planned for Haiti represents the boldest regional experiment, with Kenya providing leadership and several Caribbean states, Jamaica, the Bahamas, Antigua, and Barbuda, pledging troops. It marks an unprecedented attempt to stabilize a member state by force. Success is uncertain. Similar missions in the past have had limited long term impact. While governments focus on repression, communities have begun developing their own resilience strategies. In Trinidad and Tobago, NGOs like the Citizen Security Program have worked in at risk neighborhoods to provide mentorship, job training, and mediation. A 2024 evaluation found that communities participating in these initiatives recorded 15% fewer violent incidents compared to control areas. In Jamaica, church groups and citizen associations continue to act as mediators in gang disputes. Though informal, these interventions have prevented retaliatory killings in neighborhoods like Spanish Town. Barbados has leaned on civil society as well. The Youth Development Program expanded in 2024, offering stipends for young people who enroll in vocational training instead of drifting toward gangs. Early reports suggest modest success in reducing recidivism among at risk youth. In Haiti, community responses often take more desperate forms. Bois, a vigilante movement that emerged in 2023, continued in 2024. Citizens armed with machetes and sticks executed suspected gang members on the spot. While it offered temporary relief in some areas, the UN warned that vigilante killings risk perpetuating cycles of lawlessness. Rising homicide rates also come with heavy financial costs. Tourism dependent economies are especially vulnerable. In US and UK travel advisories in late 2024 warned tourists about rising violence. Hotel associations reported cancellations and lower bookings during the 2024 to 2025 high season. Trinidad's energy sector has not faced direct disruptions, but rising insecurity has driven businesses to increase spending on private security. The Trinidad and Tobago Chamber of Commerce estimated in December 2024 that crime cost the private sector 2 billion Trinidad and Tobago dollars, 295 million US dollars annually in lost productivity and security expenses. For Haiti, the impact is existential. The World Bank reported in early 2025 that GDP contracted by 1.8% in 2024, largely due to insecurity. Shipping companies avoid Port au Prince, rerouting cargo through the Dominican Republic, while thousands of professionals have emigrated, creating a brain drain. The search for solutions remains urgent but elusive. Caribbean governments increasingly recognize that enforcement alone cannot solve the crisis. Guns continue to flow, gangs regenerate, and prisons often serve as recruitment centers rather than deterrents. The conversation has shifted toward prevention, investment in education, youth employment, and urban renewal. Yet funding remains a challenge, particularly in small economies like Barbados and Suriname. The region also faces a diplomatic test, convincing the United States to take stronger measures on gun exports. Caribbean leaders have raised the issue repeatedly, most recently at the 2024 CARICOM Heads of Government Summit, but progress has been slow. Ultimately, the homicide crisis forces a reckoning. The Caribbean is not only a paradise of beaches and tourism, it is also a front line in global flows of drugs, guns, and people. The violence is the visible consequence of deeper fractures: poverty, inequality, fragile institutions, and foreign demand for contraband. The numbers tell one story, but the people tell another. Mothers in Port of Spain, shopkeepers in Bridgetown, students in Georgetown, families in Port au Prince all live under the shadow of rising violence. Their reality is the measure of whether governments, regional organizations, and international partners succeed or fail. The fight against homicide in the Caribbean is not just about statistics or strategies. It is about reclaiming the right to live without fear. And for now, that struggle remains unfinished. If you found this investigation eye opening, don't stop here. Subscribe to Caribbean Files for more in depth stories from across the region. Like, share, and comment to keep the conversation alive. Your voice matters. Every story we tell shines a light on truth, justice, and accountability. Stay informed, stay aware, and join us as we uncover the realities shaping the Caribbean today.